Thank you very much. I'm Sijbrandij, CEO and co-founder at GitLab. And in 2015, Khosla led our A round. And since then, we've grown from 9 to over 600 people, now in more than 50 countries. And we've been able to make software that is used by millions of users, and where our customers contribute back to it. And that software helps you to have a much faster DevOps lifecycle. So go faster from determining what you're going to make to getting it out in the marketplace, monitoring and securing and defending what you've built, learning from that, and going back in. And we're able to get those times down from weeks to minutes. The problem we solve is that software is getting more complex, and it's turning into a spaghetti at many companies. We typically come in, for example, Goldman Sachs is a customer of us. They have 30 different tools. They have over 100 people that are assigned to integrate all those tools. And the problem isn't with any of the different tools. The problem is how those tools work together. And we solve that by a single integrated application, a single application that takes you through the entire DevOps lifecycle, all the way from what's the biggest bang for the buck to make, to how do I get it out there, and how do I defend it. This is an enormous scope. In each one of these stages that you see, there are 10 stages. We have competitors that have many more engineers working on the same problem than GitLab itself. So we have to be very efficient with our capital, with our time. But we've been able to do that and gain a giant following of companies that we help solve this integration problem by replacing more and more of that functionality with GitLab. And we did that with an all-remote team, and the culture and the values that enable all remote. And that's what I'm going to talk about for the most of the time. And there will be a lot of time for questions. It's not only that our team members can contribute and that they're highly efficient. It's also that we put the rest of the community on equal footing. All of our issue trackers, for example, are open source. All of our development happens out in the open. So you have people starting at GitLab as an engineer who haven't not watched enough of my talks. They say, who is this person that keeps telling me what to do here? I couldn't find them in our team page. And the answer is that person doesn't work here. It's just a user that cares very deeply about what you do every day. And GitLab originated out of an open source project, so it was very important for us to keep that equal playing field, to not create this divide between the wider community and our company. We started all remote out of necessity. My co-founder, Dimitri, a very simple beginning. He had two problems he wanted to solve in his life. He didn't have running water, and he didn't have great collaboration software at work. And he solved the problem he could solve without spending any money, because he was a very gifted and is a very gifted programmer. So he built better collaboration software, and in the first year, 300 people joined him in that effort. I sent him an email. I said, this looks amazing what you've built. I just saw it just now. Can I start GitLab.com, but I'll have it by myself. You won't be involved. And he sent the email back, of course, so awesome that you're making this more popular. A year later, I learned that .com wasn't a great business model. For us, most of our customers self-host, and he sent out a tweet to the entire world. I want to work on GitLab full-time. So I asked him how much he wanted to make every month. I went to the local Western Union money office in the Netherlands, and they said, do you know this person, or is this someone you met over the internet? And at that time, my mental image of him was a pink mob boss from Grand Theft Auto, because that's the only picture I've seen of him, his avatar. But we got into business together, and our first employee was in Serbia, because when I told a person in Amsterdam the hourly rate I was planning to pay, he said, well, that's ridiculous, except for this guy I know in Serbia who still has to learn programming in that framework. If you teach him, he might work for that rate. We joined Y Combinator in 2015. And at the end, they said, look, this whole remote engineering, it works, but of course it doesn't work for finance and for marketing and for sales, so please start an office. And one of our sub-values is boring solutions, so we did start an office. We got it here in San Francisco, 8th and Howard, above Mike's Bikes. And the person you see in the back next to the racing bike is Hayden. He was our first local employee. He lived in Alameda, and he came in, I think, 3 days in a row. And then on the 4th day, he didn't show. But one of our values is results. So we won't measure your input. We won't measure how many hours you spend on something. We care about what you did. And I never said anything about it. He stopped showing up, and it happened with every single person we hired there. They kind of stopped showing up because they found they could just as well do their job while not being in the office. Nobody goes to the office because they particularly enjoy the commute. They come to the office because otherwise they miss information, they miss context, they miss career opportunities, they miss decisions that were taken. And from the beginning, we've tried really hard to make sure those are accessible to everyone. So we became all remote, not because we set out to do that, but because people didn't feel the need to come to the office. So I work out of my home. I have a spare bedroom, and in GitLab, we'll pay for an office if you want to work from an office. We don't force you to work from home, but there's no offices with multiple people or teams or leadership in them. We think this business model has so many upsides, it's going to become way more popular. For companies, it forces you to do the things you should have done anyway earlier. We're really good at communicating things. During our fundraise, we had a fundraising Slack channel. So people didn't have to wait for me to get back and hear the scoop. No, if we got declined by another VC, they heard it right in the channel, same time as everyone else. It's very efficient. We don't have to pay San Francisco market rates. We don't have San Francisco retention. We have almost twice as good retention of our people. And it's great opportunity. We started out doing just source code management. So one of the 10 things I showed earlier. But then someone from Poland submitted a better version. We hired him, and he convinced us that we should start doing a lot more in that single application. If we wouldn't have been able to hire people from Poland, we would have missed that brilliant person. We also think there's great upside for the environment. You don't have a commute, and you can reduce the amount of office space that's being built. I think the most important benefit that we're seeing is the upside for families and friends. Apart from saving time on the commute, which is probably obvious, there's also flexibility, how you allot your time. So the ability to go to the supermarket during the day when it's not busy, to go to the gym during the day when it's not busy. The ability to move closer to aging parents, and the ability to kind of shuffle your priorities around when the need arises is very big. And I think that helps with retention enormously. We also think it's a great thing for the world. There's a lot of wealth being created here in the Bay Area, but it's not equally distributed. So this doesn't solve everything, but it does spread wealth to smaller towns, to villages. We just hired someone in New Zealand who's living off the grid except for the internet. Now, New Zealand is pretty well off, but we got all kinds of places where people are now able to have very well-paying jobs and the ability to join a fast-growing startup without having to move here. So although we think it will be more popular, and I'm seeing that in the latest YC batches, there's more and more companies like this coming, it's not easy to be all remote. I think the hardest thing is time zones. It's the end of distance with internet, but time zones are very, very hard. We have to do a lot of things to work more asynchronously without losing effectiveness. And we do 3 things to make that work: iteration, transparency, and building trust. Iteration means scoping it down, setting a very, very small step. Because if you set a small step, you can test the effect, you can see the results of that, of rolling that out, and then take the next step. And you don't have to coordinate the step with as many people. The bigger the step, the more coordination you need. So by taking very small steps very quickly, we can get a lot more done. So we have internal lingo that says MVC, minimum viable change, the smallest thing that could possibly add value. That's what you do, not more than that. We have the DRI. The DRI is the person who does the work. They make the decisions. So at GitLab, decisions are very open. We're open that we're taking a decision. Everyone can chime in, but there's no consensus culture. It's a strict who does the work takes the decision, and you don't have to convince anybody else. The other thing is transparency. We record, I want to say obsessively, but that sounds very negative. We record a lot. If you go to GitLab Unfiltered, you'll find a lot of YouTube videos, and that includes like our marketing department discussing the latest metrics. We have a handbook of over 2,000 pages. And I think it's the best example I've seen of like all the internal processes of a startup. And you can type GitLab handbook and any subject that comes to mind, and hopefully we have a relevant web page about it. I encourage you to do it now. And this makes life better for the sender because you don't get interrupted. I rarely get asked the same question twice by people at the company. It's also better for the receiver because they don't have to wait until they can tap someone on the shoulder, and they get the best version, the version that is built up over time. If you Google GitLab values, you'll find our values page, and I think our values are better articulated than any other startup because we wrote them down and we could improve upon that body of work. So at GitLab, we take decisions handbook first. So if you want to change something in the company, you don't send the email, you don't send the PowerPoint, you send a change to the handbook. That change is not some documentation after the fact. That change is the change. There's nothing before it, there's nothing after it. Changing the handbook means the process is now changed. Also, we do a lot of things out in public. The last thing is, if you have a lot of asynchronous communication, you kind of deplete trust. It's not easy working with each other in text. So we encourage video calls. We encourage people to have a coffee chat. Just plan 25 minutes without an agenda. We also encourage time in person. We just took the whole company to New Orleans for a week. And there we don't make people sit through presentations, no death by PowerPoint. It's an unconference setting where the subjects people want to talk about. They talk about burnout, they talk about stress, they talk about hobbies, they talk about what they want to talk about, and we do lots of excursions together. We also have a travel stipend. There's articles of people starting at GitLab, and they said, I'm going to travel around the world in 6 months. I'm going to meet as many GitLabbers as I can. We encourage that because for some people, it was like the first colleague they've seen, even though they were working at the company for over half a year. If you're interested, I'd love to do public video calls with people about this subject. We have a lot of information about this, but also I really welcome questions. Thank you.
Hi. So my company is actually becoming more and more remote as we grow for some of the same reasons that you spelled out. We're certainly worried about time zones. You addressed some of how to deal with that. But I'm also curious about two of the other issues we've thought about, cultural issues, and people not necessarily having the same ideas about lots of different things. And then also pay disparity, right? So one of the advantages of going overseas, for example, is that you can pay less. But then how is that seen culturally when somebody in New York needs to make more than somebody who's working in Serbia, for example?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about all three of those. So the first thing, time zones is hard. InVision is a great company. It's over 1,000 people now. I think they're one of them and WordPress are the biggest remote one. They have everyone work East Coast times throughout the company. That's also a way to solve it. It's not our way, but it's another way to solve it. Cultural sensitivities. We once had an April Fool's Day thing that was make GitLab great again. And as soon as the East Coast woke up, our marketing department was very clear that we had to take that joke that originated in Europe down as soon as possible. As a company, we need the people from North America to be a lot more direct. There's no reading between the lines. You got to state things plainly. We got to tell everyone outside North America to tone it down a bit and use the most polite version of what they want to say. So you got to find a balance there. Regarding compensation, there's different philosophies. Basecamp is, for example, a company on the record. They have 40 people, and they pay everyone the same. We embraced paying a local rate. So there's a blog post from us why we pay local rates, and below every job posting, you can find a calculator that for over 200 locations tells you what you're going to make at GitLab in your own currency. And spent a lot of time on how that's calculated. So that calculator is completely open, and you can just reuse it. Microphone is on the way.
How we do recruiting and interviews and references in these environments?
Yeah, recruiting, we have a big recruiting team. We now have about 20 people starting a week. We're growing from 400 to over 1,000 people this calendar year. We do the same things, except things that would have been in-person meetings are Zoom video calls. So we run the company on Zoom, on Slack, on Google Docs, and a lot of GitLab issues, merge request pages. Reference calls are reference calls like they would usually be. Does that address your question?
I mean, mostly like the culture differences when you're talking to a reference and in another country, and they have different culture differences.
Yeah, apart from the telling people to be a bit less or more explicit when giving feedback, there hasn't been a whole lot. I think one thing is in San Francisco, we're a bit more woke than around the rest of the world, and we set as a company policy that we're like a Silicon Valley type startup, and we're leaning towards that end of the spectrum instead of having a discussion like what values we would embrace otherwise. If you can raise your hand for the next question already.
When you guys are trying to do complex problem solving that requires multiple functional players, like kind of your key team members, and it requires a lot of interaction, whiteboard, visualization, how do you do that?
I think right now, if I'm in meetings in person, I'm sometimes annoyed that we don't all have a Google Doc in front of us with a cursor. We've gotten really good at using indented numbered lists in Google Docs. And it's kind of a whiteboard that doesn't run out of space, where everyone has a marker and everyone is looking at it at the same time. You don't have to take a picture of it afterwards, but it's already there and copy-pastable. So although there's maybe still a few things where a whiteboard is better, some people use like remote sketching things. I think for the majority of brainstorms and ideas, a Google Docs where everyone has edit rights is far superior.
Don't you miss that human element of team building at the same time, where you can see people's body language and feel how they're feeling? Yeah,
very, very important. So we have everyone has great webcams, everyone has good connections, and it's like video on all the time. Audio conferences are like death. Like I feel myself dying a bit inside every time I'm in one. So yeah, you can see expressions, and people do that. And we had, for example, our board call was a hybrid one, where like a lot of people were on one cam stream, and that made it super hard. So I wrote a thing about how hybrid calls are horrible. And I think you can get to like 80% of the body language by just seeing this part of someone.
let's. I think that we have to cut that off now. There are a lot of great questions, but I'd like everyone to thank Sid for coming out.
Thank you.